What's going on, everybody? Happy week 12 recap season. Matt, welcome back to the 2-minute drill. I am James Grande. No, I am not Dan Malin, the usual host of this show. I am hosting today with none other than Matt Selz. Matt is back from the bullpen. We're calling him in for the long relief. Malin once again on a flight with The Rock. I mean, the guy just loves The Rock. He couldn't get enough of The Rock. We talk about this every time Selz fills in, how much Dan Malin loves The Rock. But Matt, what's going on, buddy? How was your week 12?
My week 12 was good. I saw K-State beat KU in the college ranks, which was big because, look, KU didn't have anything left to play for except to ruin K-State's shot at a Big 12 championship appearance against Jen Piacenti's TCU Horned Frog. So the two purple teams in the Big 12 are headed for the championship game there. And then over the weekend, I saw the Jets miraculously pull out a game against the Bears. It looked a little dicey there in the beginning, but yeah, it was overall pretty good. And then I found out that the owner of the Nats may not be selling because he's actually worth $2 billion more than we thought he was. So all around a pretty good sports weekend.
So I'm going to start looking around my house to see if I can find $2 billion laying around.
I know. I don't understand how this guy made $2 billion more in a year.
Okay, well, I'm going to be looking for a couple million, couple billion, couple cents, honestly, would be helpful. My week 12 was pretty good. In one fantasy league, I need a Monday night miracle. We are recording here Monday afternoon, so I do need a Monday night miracle from Jonathan Taylor, and unfortunately, the miracle includes Deontay Johnson as well. So my optimism, typically high, not very high tonight.
So my big money league was good enough that when I joined John Impemba and Ryan Hallam on SiriusXM on Sunday night, I didn't even care that I didn't play Miles Sanders in Sunday Night Football because I was already whooping the guy that I was playing, and Miles Sanders was on my bench, so the 25-something points he put up, I did not care about. He needs like 34 points from Najee Harris tonight to beat me, and I'm not at all concerned.
No, you're probably safe there. Must be a pretty good team. Miles Sanders is on the bench.
I played Aaron Jones and Ramondre Stevenson in the in running back spots, and then Christian McCaffrey in the flex.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
And I have him on the bench, Miles Sanders on the bench.
It's a good transition, Matt, because our first topic for Week 12 is about the aforementioned Christian McCaffrey. And I think it's worth mentioning that, let's face facts, I think their overarching thoughts on Christian McCaffrey going to San Francisco were going to be, he is the undisputed RB1 moving forward. It's a great system for running backs. Kyle Shanahan's a guru, yada, yada, yada. And you know what? I was also a part of that bandwagon. Anything to get Christian McCaffrey really out of Carolina, I was here for. But yesterday, we see Christian McCaffrey play a season-low 63% of the snaps. He was splitting time with Elijah Mitchell before Elijah Mitchell's injury himself. And since the Week 9 bye in San Fran, McCaffrey hasn't played more than 65% of the snaps. And we come to find out the oft-injured McCaffrey, who I don't think anybody saw this coming, is dealing with left knee inflammation. And now it's obviously was fine enough for him to play. There was, but it was not fine enough to keep him limited. My question is, as a McCaffrey owner, I think this is the best. I mean, this is the source because you are one. We go right to the source on this. Should we be worried about McCaffrey rest of year if we're dealing with left knee inflammation for a player who, as great, and I mean as great as he is when healthy, has been hurt a lot?
So, you as a Giants fan have dealt with this with one Saquon Barkley in the last couple of years being injured and being elite when he's healthy, right? took some shots later in draft season on Christian McCaffrey because I figured, if he stays healthy, why am I avoiding this guy, right?
Right.
So far, he stayed pretty healthy. I will say, however, that a few weeks ago, if you go back and listen to the Family Times podcast the week that McCaffrey was traded, Hallam is a Niners fan, had a debate about if McCaffrey's value actually increased by going to San Francisco. And I was of the belief that it didn't actually increase because of the way that Kyle Shanahan runs his offense. It's a matchup-based game plan week after week after week. He takes the same approach that Bill Belichick takes in New England. That's why a lot of people can't stand the Patriots guys for fantasy value because you never know what you're going to get, right? Because it's a game plan that's based on their opponent's strengths and weaknesses. Okay. We've seen over the last 4 or 5 seasons now with San Francisco that anybody with 2 legs and who's healthy will carry the ball for San Francisco. It's a plug and play system, right? We've seen Raheem Mostert shine in this. We've seen Jeff Wilson, now both with Miami, shine in this. We've seen Elijah Mitchell shine. Now it's Christian McCaffrey. There's been, Kyle Juszczyk, their fullback gets touches. So I don't think we're going to see him get I don't think we're going to see McCaffrey get a full load of work the rest of the way. There's not really any point. They're rolling through that division at this point. I don't really foresee Seattle or Arizona being there when it counts.
Oh, Arizona's dead. They're dead.
I mean, Kyler Murray just stood up and said schematically we were effed in the press conference after that game.
Absolutely.
And my question was that on a Call of Duty field or was that on an NFL field?
Good question. Great question.
But, they're going to keep McCaffrey on the field, but they're going to limit him. And in terms of touches, I think we probably see him catch the ball more and Elijah Mitchell run the ball more, I think is how they would probably split that backfield.
Now, the question, though, becomes Elijah Mitchell expected to miss time. There's an MCL injury as of Sunday. So we saw Jordan Mason step up. He played just 9 snaps. They have TDP as well. He was activated off the IR. Then they have Debo. I guess, if Christian McCaffrey is not going to play more than 60% of the snaps, and I agree he's going to be the guy in the passing game, is there any merit to maybe just looking? I mean, Jordan Mason will be available on your waiver wire. TDP will be available on your waiver wire. In 14-team leagues that, you could have had an injury to Travis Etienne, who was apparently okay. You could have had an injury to Joe Mixon last week. There could have been injuries in your backfield. I mean, is a Davis Price or a Jordan Mason at all interesting, or are we just gonna kind of monitor the situation, and if neither stand out, just continue to just play Christian McCaffrey?
Well, first of all, I would still lean the touches that McCaffrey gets are going to be more effective than the touches that other people get, right?
Right.
I will say, here's a question for you, James. How many teams, what percent of the league has bye weeks left in the next 2 weeks?
Well, I know week 14 is a big bye week. There is a lot of buys, and there
are 8 teams in the NFL with buys in week 13 and 14 combined. There's 2 in week 13, and there are 6 teams on bye in week 14. So you have a quarter of the NFL still to have their bye week.
Yeah.
That means you're going to need bye week fill-ins as you make a playoff run here down the stretch. So I would monitor a guy like Jordan Mason. I would monitor, obviously, Christian McCaffrey. And, I would do that. I would play it by ear. I think it's going to be Mason that gets the leftover carries, but I think they do it by committee. I think you'll see Juszczyk get some carries. I think you'll see Debo get some carries. I think McCaffrey will be out in a limited sense. Mason will be in there. So, yeah, I think it's going to be an RBCC or an RBBC situation.
Jordan Mason, just for context, 5 carries, 25 yards this past week. Another running back room suffering an injury is your Jets. Michael Carter, they have officially come out. Robert Saleh has said Carter is day-to-day. He also said that for Corey Davis for about 3 weeks, and Corey Davis didn't play for like all of them. So definitely a situation to monitor. But Michael Carter with the ankle injury. It was an interesting day for Jets running backs because they healthy scratch James Robinson, who they went out and acquired, and he actually looked good prior to their bye week. I know he was dealing with a little knee ailment, but then he just didn't play this week. Healthy scratch. They used something named Zonovan Knight. He looked very effective. He actually led the team in carries, 14 carries, 69 yards. Also caught 3 passes for 34 yards. So, over 100 total yards for the day. And then there's old reliable Ty Johnson, always seemingly just there when a Jets running back gets hurt, because they always do. What do we make of this Jets running back room if Carter's to miss time? Is Zonovan Knight the guy? Is Ty Johnson someone we're looking at in PPR formats? Because I think we both agree. I know Zonovan Knight is the guy with 3 for 34, but Ty Johnson is a very good pass catcher out of the backfield. And is James Robinson just dead? Like, how do you break down this Jets backfield if Michael Carter is to miss time?
So Michael Carter is to miss time. I would still think that they have something tied in James Robinson because they did trade for him. They have draft pick capital, tied to his value there. So it was frankly quite shocking to find him as a healthy scratch inactive this past week against the Bears. So, look, if James Robinson if they're down on him, and we're going to have to pay attention to reports and press conferences and practice and whatnot, they are down on him, I would go at Knight because clearly he was the plug-in. He got a lot of touches. They have a pretty decent schedule the next 2 weeks against, I believe it's Minnesota and Detroit, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Minnesota. So you are correct on 2, but it's Minnesota, Buffalo, Detroit are the next
so
3
don't play anybody against Buffalo because their defense is quite good, and the Bills are going to be pretty upset that the Jets beat them earlier in the year. But yeah, the Vikings, look, their rush defense is only okay, and the Lions can't stop anybody in any phase of defense. So I would go with Knight.
Yeah, 48% of the snaps I think is super interesting because he had played 0% of the snaps up until Sunday. 0. He had not played a single snap this year.
Well, okay, but in fairness, he was behind Breece Hall and Michael Carter, and they traded for James Robinson, and they had Ty Johnson.
Touché. All valid points. Ty Johnson, 24% snap share there. I agree on the Zonovan Knight. I'm just like, I just don't know what to make. It's kind of what you said. Like, they did trade James Robinson, an undrafted free agent, for a 6th round pick when Breece Hall went down. Like, they invested in that guy, and then, I mean, things in the NFL change week to week, and Michael Carter being out would obviously. I think at the end of the day, if James Robinson is active, and we get word that he is working with the ones during practice this week, he's the guy to own.
Also, keep in mind that Mike White being under center helps the run game because Zach Wilson was doing nothing but throwing -3 yards a play. Mike White can move the ball downfield, so they can't just sit and put 8-9 guys in a box. They have to respect the passing game, which helps any running back.
Yeah, and let's talk about White because he looked incredible, and he did this last year too when he plugged and played for the Jets, and he looked great in his first game. He gave that electric presser where he was like, "I think I'm better than every other quarterback. I should have been taken as the number 1 quarterback," and everyone's like, "All right, dude, like, let's slow it down." But and then he looked not as good the rest of the year, but he was apparently dealing with an injury. So I guess the question is, coming off his first start, 22 of 28, 315 yards and 3 tuds. Is Mike White potentially the best waiver wire option at quarterback? And if not, like, how confident would you be with White if he is your quarterback? Because like we've been talking about it all year. The quarterback landscape kind of stinks this year. I mean, a lot of guys we expected to be good aren't. A lot of guys that we expected to be okay aren't. Like, there are only a handful of quality starters every week. Like, is Mike White played himself into, and by this is a 1 game sample, I understand, and we just talked about the schedule, Minnesota, Buffalo, Detroit. Is Mike White streamable or is Mike White startable for the next few weeks?
I think he's startable for the next few weeks. And look, this isn't. Yes, I am a hopeful Jets fan. Okay, but I can also be removed from the situation and analyze it from a fantasy standpoint. Who else are you getting right now? Like Bryce Perkins is like the only dude on the waiver wire who's starting, right?
Yep.
And that guy threw for 100 yards, a touchdown, 2 picks, and 44 yards rushing, which is a whole whopping 8 points. Okay. And by the way, doesn't have anywhere near the weapons that
Right.
Mike White has at his disposal. Okay. And everybody's going, well, Garrett Wilson disappeared. Okay. No, he hasn't. Garrett Wilson has 4 touchdowns now without Zach Wilson on the field and 0 touchdowns with Zach Wilson on the field. That guy just doesn't like being thrown to by Zach Wilson. Elijah Moore showed up yesterday. Granted, 2 targets, not great.
Made love to the football. I don't know if you saw that interview,
He
but
did
he
make love
made
to the
love to the
football and then had an electric presser, as Elijah Moore tends to do.
Sure.
And the schedule is pretty favorable, right? Yes, the Bills, okay. But Zach Wilson passed on the Bills. Like, Zach Wilson had a 300-plus yard day against the Bills like 4 weeks ago, okay? So they can be passed on. The Vikings don't stop anybody through the air, and neither do the Lions. So I think there's a window here for Mike White to actually be fantasy relevant, and he's got enough weapons on the outside, and there's some semblance of a running game, and the defense is going to keep him in games. So I think Mike White is a perfectly fine, startable, not streamable, actual startable fantasy quarterback, especially given the guys that are either injured now or coming up on bye, because you got Rodgers is injured, you got Stafford is injured, you've got, obviously Russell Wilson is
Justin Fields.
Justin Fields probably won't play the rest of the year. And you've got a bunch of dudes coming up on buys. So I would play Mike White.
It is worth noting in that Buffalo matchup, they'll have Tre'Davious White and Jordan Poyer, 2 guys they didn't have for that first game against the Jets. Those are 2 quite talented players in the secondary.
They are.
I may not in that game, if I have another option, I may go that direction, but I completely agree on the Minnesota and the Detroit front.
Okay, but here's the thing. Buffalo, even with those dudes, can still be beat in the slot, and Elijah Moore is a decent enough slot receiver to beat people.
Sure.
I'm not saying they win. I'm not saying the Jets beat the Bills. Not saying that. But if you can get 250 and 2 touchdowns out of Mike White against the Bills, you'll take it, right?
Yep.
Which is totally plausible.
Let's rapid fire this. We're gonna do a Mike White versus waiver wire or option, okay? So these are all players. I'm gonna include a 51% owned player according to ESPN leagues in this because I think it's interesting. Mike White or Russell Wilson rest of the season. Russell Wilson 51% owned. I agreed. Mike White or Jimmy.
By the way, weird stat about Russell Wilson. I know everybody's tracking him against his toilets, but Carson Wentz has 3 more passing touchdowns than Russell Wilson, and Carson Wentz hasn't played or sniffed the field since week 6. Okay, Russell Wilson's a dumpster fire. Just dump him.
It is.
Like, you're getting negative money on the dollar at this point. Just dump him and cut your losses.
Mike White or Jimmy G?
I will take Mike White only because Jimmy G seems to be able to win games without throwing touchdowns.
Mike White or Deshaun Watson rest of the year?
Dang. I might go with Watson in that one.
Think it's a perfect segue because we might have seen the last start of the year for Jacoby Brissett, Deshaun Watson eligible to return in Week 12 against
Week 13.
Week 13 against
Houston.
Houston, his former employer and favorite
Please tell
place.
me the NFL didn't think this through before they gave up.
They are very they think about everything. This was clearly thought about. So I guess my question is, as we head into the rest of the year, the Cleveland Browns not dead. I don't want to announce them dead yet, but they're 4-7. They're getting Deshaun Watson back. How do you assess Watson's fantasy outlook rest of year? Because he's only been practicing. This will be his second week of practice, right? He was able to return to practice last week. He is now eligible to play in week 13. How do you assess Watson from a fantasy standpoint? And what about some of his weapons that include, and these three are the main, I would say, pass catchers of the bunch: Amari Cooper, David Njoku, and Donovan Peoples-Jones.
Look, he's obviously quite talented. There's a reason
Right.
why the Browns traded for him. We've seen Deshaun Watson put up top 5 QB numbers with next to nothing in Houston. Right. Like, they got rid of so much wide receiver talent, and yet Watson still just chucked it up to anybody. Okay. Amari Cooper has been very good under the radar this year.
He has.
He's been very, very good. Donovan Peoples-Jones has been a sneaky, solid wide receiver option. I'm not saying he's a stud. I'm just saying he's been sneaky good. Okay. And when Njoku's been healthy, now we all understand why they gave him the contract extension.
Right.
They did. Here's the thing. I don't think I would start Deshaun Watson this week. Houston, for as much as they can't stop the run, actually does a pretty good job of stopping the pass. They've only allowed they're allowing like less than 212 yards passing a game, right? And Houston and Cleveland runs the ball more often than they pass the ball at this point. Right. It's very close to a 50-50 split. And when you have a guy like Nick Chubb in the backfield, whenever you want to call plays for him, that usually goes pretty well against Houston. So that aside, he also hasn't practiced very much, as you said. And you have to assume that he's going to be trying to press to impress not only Cleveland fans, but also get back at Houston fans, right? And when we see guys press and try too hard, that's when crappy performances happen. So I'm not sure that I would play him this week. Going forward, though, I don't have... Look, off-field stuff aside, I'm not talking about that. It was right. Fantasy perspective-wise, I have no problem playing him after the Houston game.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't know what the rapport is going to be. I mean, for 12 weeks, this team has worked with a different quarterback. And I know, like, we've seen plenty of quarterbacks step in, Mike White this week. But at least Mike White has had practice reps for 12 weeks. Deshaun Watson has practiced.
He also started in the same system last year.
Right, started in the same system, correct. So it'll definitely be interesting. I mean, look, we just talked about it when we talked about Mike White. Quarterback stinks. It is the worst year of quarterback. There has been a lot of disappointing top draft picks: Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray. It's been a disappointing year. Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. I mean,
Smith's the top 10 quarterback.
Yeah, it has been a forgettable year at the quarterback position. So Marcus Mariota is currently a QB1 in ESPN format. So like, that is what it is. That is the current landscape. So like, if I am using someone like if my starting quarterback right now is Daniel Jones, or it's Kirk Cousins, or it's Derek Carr, or it's Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Jared Goff, Russell Wilson, and I'm sure there's plenty of teams with those guys, right, as their starter, because there are plenty of fantasy owners that wait on quarterback.
I have Derek Carr as my QB2 in a super flex.
I would take off rip out of the gate, as you mentioned, everything off field aside. Deshaun Watson, the football player, the fantasy asset. I'm playing Deshaun Watson over every one of those guys. There's a lot of talent in Cleveland. They have a very good run game. Their defense should be better than it is. He's as good as it gets in fantasy at the quarterback position. And he hasn't had these weapons that he has in Cleveland. So there are probably a handful of guys I'd start over Watson. It might blow up in my face. It might blow up in anyone's face that uses him against Houston. But just the fact that his dual threat ability, his touchdown, like everything about Deshaun Watson on the field makes me immediately put him in my top 12. Week 1, doesn't matter. He is a top 12 quarterback to me this week and rest of season. And I think to the question I asked earlier about like how much he elevates these guys, like they've all had great years. And I think it only could get better. There's obviously only one football, and Nick Chubb still breathes in this world. So like we'll see. But I think Cooper, Peoples-Jones, and Njoku all get boost to Deshaun Watson's presence. Matt, can we annex the NFC South and just send them away, never to be seen again, never to be spoken about again, and just act like we've always had a 28-team league? And if we can't, who's going to win that division? somebody explain it, because it seemed like the Bucs had figured it out. For 3 quarters, it seemed like the Bucs had figured it out, and then they didn't. And then they lost a game that they shouldn't have.
They sat on timeouts for some inexplicable reason.
Who's going to win Who's winning the division? Is it still the Bucs? Is it still the Bucs division to lose? Is Sam Darnold the answer? Is Artie Smith a dog in Atlanta? Are the Saints ever going to realize that Andy Dalton stinks? Like, who is going to win this division?
Like, okay, so the U.S. played England in soccer over the weekend, right? And it had a massive viewership. Like,
right.
Bigger viewer. I think it might have been bigger viewership than the Michigan-Ohio State game, but I can't remember. But either way, in soccer in England, they relegate the teams that suck. I think we should do that with one division every year in the NFL.
Agreed.
Right? The NFC South this year is that division. Look, if the Bucs lose 2 more games, there's not going to be a winner that's over
500.
Right?
Yeah,
they're 5-7 right now.
Well, they can. Yeah, if they lose 2. If everyone wins out, which can't happen because they obviously
they got to play each other at least a couple.
Yeah, I mean, everyone is potentially able to go over 500 because it's 4-8, right? Isn't Carolina and New Orleans both 4-8?
Yeah,
so they can technically both technically win out.
The 2 teams above them can't win out because there's gonna be divisional games down the stretch. Yeah, it's terrible. Like 3 weeks ago, somebody said everybody in the NFC South is fighting for either the conference lead or the 5th pick in the draft, right? Like, it's terrible. I still have to go with the Bucs because the talent is there, right? You're talking about Tom Brady, and by the way, on Sunday was his first loss ever in his career when leading by at least 7 points with 2 minutes left in the game.
Dude,
the loss. So. Like, that's nuts, right? Like the confluence of events that are happening here is not great. Todd Bowles sucks, but I still think that the Bucs have enough talent to overcome the suckage of their head coach. I still can't figure out how the Saints are winning anything because literally their offense is, I don't even know anymore. Atlanta won't pass the ball to save their lives. They have Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and neither of those guys are going to crack like 60 catches, which is ridiculous. And God help me if Sam Darnold comes back and leads the Panthers.
Let's go.
So I would say the Bucs still have the talent on offense and defense to win that division, and they have the lead right now. I think they hold it. But it's not going to be pretty.
So I'm going to take a different stance, okay? I'm going to go with the Artie Smith-led Atlanta Falcons.
Oh my God.
And here's why. And I'm not saying I want this to happen. I don't like they're boring. Tampa Bay's schedule the remainder of the year And it's not the easiest, it's not the hardest. But after they play the Saints next week, Monday Night Football, they have to travel to San Francisco. I think we both favor the 49ers in that game. I think 49ers are one of the teams probably favored to win the Super Bowl at this point, or to make it represent the NFC. They have to face the Bengals, who are literally dominating in every facet of the game right now, kind of like they did last year, and that's kind of what catapulted them into the Super Bowl. Then they have to play the Cardinals in Arizona, and I know the Cardinals aren't great. They still have a lot of firepower that's going to be in Arizona. And then they end with Carolina and in Atlanta for the final game of the year. So, there's 3 losses in there. That's a 10-loss team. When you look at the Falcons, okay? Pittsburgh at home next week, very winnable game. In New Orleans, very winnable game. The only tough games, Baltimore, definitely tough, but we just saw what Baltimore can look like. We just saw the Jaguars come back on that team. Home against Arizona, different than going on the road. And then week 18, Tampa Bay. Give me the Falcons. I know Tampa Bay currently has the tiebreaker because they have the win over them. But Atlanta also has the bye week, the week 14 bye, right? I don't think it can come at a better time. They win week 13 against Steelers, get a bye week, and then they have 2 weeks to prepare for the Ravens. I'm taking the Falcons to win this division. I don't think anybody in the fantasy community wants to hear that because how much love they have for these young guys in Atlanta, and they can't understand that Artie Smith having 5 wins with this team is a miracle, and he's doing wonders for this team. Look, we all know it's a bridge year for Marcus Mariota to whoever's next, but give me the Falcons. They're going to finish 8-9 and win this division. I'm pumped for them. I'm pumped for them already. 3-2 to finish, and they win the division with that Week 18 win against Tampa Bay. We could quickly talk about Aaron Rodgers, and then we can finish it up with a little game that we're going to run a little buy or sell. But if Rodgers, we just got word from Matt LaFleur, they still don't have anything concrete on Aaron Rodgers. Simple question, Matt. If Aaron Rodgers is to return this year or eligible to return this year, should they just continue to ride out the Jordan Love experience, or should they turn back to Aaron Rodgers?
I think you see Jordan Love start in week 13, then the Packers have a week 14 bye, and then you see Aaron Rodgers back.
Interesting.
So I heard Collinsworth and Tirico talking about this on the Sunday night game when Rodgers was hurt and Love came in, and Tirico made a point that on this date, like 15 years ago or something, Collinsworth was calling a game for some network and Brett Favre got hurt and Rodgers came in, and that was the end of Brett Favre's career in Green Bay. Here's the only difference. Favre was a free agent at the end of that year. Aaron Rodgers just signed a 4-year deal.
A lot of money.
A lot of money. Like $15 million guaranteed.
So much money.
So much money they can't afford to pay anybody else on that team, which is why they had to trade Devontae Adams. Right? So you're not I understand that it's basically a lost season at this point. They've got almost zero playoff hope in the wide open NFC because they're now 4-8 after losing to the Eagles. I'm sure that if they win out and 17 other teams have a loss or a tie or some exact point total the rest of the way, they may have a shot, right? So I think that's what we see. I think you see Jordan Love play in week 13, and then they have a bye, and then you see Rodgers back out there. Because at this point, what is the value of playing Jordan Love? You already know that Rodgers is there for another 3 seasons. Right? So it's not like, oh, we have to go find out what this guy is because we may need him next year. No. If he has a good game in week 13, you don't see him again, and they trade him in the offseason because they'll be like, hey, remember Matt Was Matt Flynn
Yep.
that had a good game and then Seattle signed for an obnoxious contract?
And then Russell Wilson won the job.
Right, exactly. So no, I think Aaron Rodgers plays in week 15.
I guess it's just all going to depend on the injury.
I
If
mean,
he's
it's an
eligible
old
to
week,
return.
which is gonna linger, but maybe he can smoke enough ayahuasca or whatever the hell it's called to make it feel better. I don't know.
Ayahuasca, but yeah, ayahuasca might be as good.
I mean, smoke enough of it, maybe that's how it's pronounced. I don't know.
They're 11th currently in the NFC.
7 teams make it, so
Eight teams make it. All right, isn't it 8 now?
no, I'm
Or is
pretty
it
sure it's
7? All
7.
right, math is hard.
Winner, 3 wild cards.
Yeah, math is hard. 7 makes it. Washington Commanders, left hand up. Who are we? The Commanders. They are 7-5 in the current final position. So definitely something interesting. Matt, let's finish up with a little rapid fire, okay? And this is just based on recent performance. I think all guys that a lot of people are kind of looking at like, oh, I might have something here. So let's go over a little rapid fire. We're going to start with Trevor Lawrence, quarterback, Jacksonville Jaguars. He is coming off a monster game, 321 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air, led the Jaguars back, had the little 2-point conversion for the win as well. Are you buying or selling Trevor Lawrence as a top 8 quarterback rest of season?
Top 8?
Yep. So the likes of Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, possibly Justin Fields, Geno Smith, Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, and then Trevor Lawrence is currently top 10. That is your top 10 as of now. We are obviously, that is excluding the return of Deshaun Watson. Tua Tagovailoa is healthy. So top 8 quarterback rest of season for Trevor Lawrence.
No. Like, he's great, right? And I have him in a super flex league, and I keep swapping out him and some other guys. But my problem with Trevor Lawrence being a top 8 quarterback the rest of the way is the schedule. Okay. They get Detroit in week 13. Great. That's a tasty matchup. Although we've seen Detroit be better the last few weeks, but not great, right? DVOA wise, they're still the worst pass defense in the league and whatnot. Then they face Tennessee, who's pretty good defensively. Then they got the Cowboys, who are pretty good defensively. Mm-hmm. They got the Jets, who are also pretty good defensively. Houston in week 17 for the leagues going to championships in week 17. Their pass defense is pretty good. So, I don't know. It was impressive what he did against the Ravens. I'm not, not saying it wasn't, although the Ravens defense is not very good in the second half of games this year. They just give up a whole lot of points in the second half. But I have a hard time believing he's going to be a top 8 with that schedule.
Buy or sell 300, we'll call him Mr. 300 after Sunday's performance. Josh Jacobs as a top 3. You know what? Top 2 running back rest of season. He was the clear-cut, no question, unequivocal RB1 in week 12, going for 300 yards and a couple scores. Josh Jacobs, buy or sell, top 2 running back rest of season.
Top 2?
Yep, top 2. He is currently RB2 on the year, only behind Austin Eckler.
Okay, well, the 46-point showing that he had.
He's had 2. Well, he's had 2 of them. Well, to be fair, he's had 2. He has had 2 of those this season.
Yeah, that certainly helps. Top 2. You know what? Sure. We'll go out there because I think Cleveland is now going to start to pass a little more now that they have Deshaun Watson back, right?
Yep.
McCaffrey is injured and basically in a timeshare. Saquon has been
doesn't look good. Doesn't look healthy. Doesn't look healthy, or he looks worn down.
Right, he looks worn down. I think they used him up too much early in the year, right? Can't really count on. Look, Joe Mixon has been injured. Derrick Henry's been stoppable at times. And again, you got to kind of look at schedule here. They got the Chargers, who you can run against.
Yep.
Up. They got the Rams, who the Chiefs just ran against with no problem. The Patriots,
That'll be tough. That'll be a tough spot for him.
That'll be tough. You can scheme against them, but that's probably the toughest one. The Steelers you can run against, not an elite matchup, but middle of the road. And the Niners are going to be tough.
Yeah, you don't move the ball against the Niners.
Not really. But I'll still say that against the Chargers, the Rams, the Steelers, he can put up enough points.
So are you buying top 2 Josh Jacobs season? Or are you selling?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'll buy it.
Okay. We're going to head back to New York. The theme of the podcast has been New York today. Garrett Wilson, with his newly acclaimed quarterback, his new best friend in Mike White, as a top 20 receiver rest of year, which is entrenched in wide receiver 2 territory. And if you're saying you're buying top 20, I mean, you might be buying like close to RB or wide receiver 1 status, but we'll stay at top 20, a top 20 receiver, because he is clearly their number 1 receiver. I know Elijah Moore was, had a big catch yesterday, but Garrett Wilson doubled up and some, 2.5x anyone else's targets in Week 12. Is Garrett Wilson a top 20 receiver, buy or sell rest of the year?
Presuming that Mike White finishes out the year as the Jets starting quarterback, I would buy.
Okay.
Because the Vikings you can pass against, the Lions you can pass against, the Jags you can pass against, aside from Lamar Jackson not being able to, and the Seahawks you can pass against or run against, as Josh Jacobs discovered. So yeah, I would say yes. Look, he got 8 targets from Mike White yesterday. First start of the year, he's gotten 8 targets and 2 touchdowns. So yeah, I would take it.
And finally, at the tight end position, and I have top 5 written down. And I almost want to boost it up because tight end's been so bad, but we'll stay there. Dalton Schultz. It's just such a bad position, and we'll get to it. Dalton Schultz as a top 5 tight end rest of season. Dalton Schultz looks just different when Dak Prescott is under center. So buying or selling Schultz top 5 rest of year.
Yes.
Probably the easiest buy, I think, of the.
It's kind of by default, right? Because who's ahead of him? Andrews and Kelsey?
All right, top 3.
Yeah, I mean,
probably.
Who else are we debating in this group?
Hawkinson, Kittle. List really ends there. Higbee's dead. Gerald Everett.
It's Hawk and Kittle and Schultz. He's absolutely top 5 because we've only named 4 dudes aside from Schultz. Top 3? It depends on what Michael Gallup does, right? If Gallup, who's looking healthier, continues to siphon off targets, then maybe Schultz doesn't crack the top 3. But I'd be comfortable saying he's top
5.
3.
You'd be comfortable saying top 3? Okay.
I would put him right behind Kelsey and Andrews at this point.
I would too with Dak. We saw the report last year. We've seen the report when they've both been healthy this year. It's pretty special. They have a great connection with or without Michael Gallup, because Gallup looked great in the Giants game. CeeDee Lamb looked great in the Giants game. So did Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz had a big game himself. Big shout out to you, Matt, for filling in for Dan. It was a great segment. Fun segment as well. I'm sure you love to talk about your Jets literally from front to end of this book, but
man, it's not often.
Not often, you know what? But your Jets are different this year, so respect the got to give them their flowers when you can, because there's not a lot of times we've been able to in the past. But big shout out to you, big shout out to Dan. Presumably we'll be back next week. And big shout out to the FA Nation for supporting this pod and supporting us every week in, week out, across the Fantasy Alarm stratosphere. In every facet: football, baseball, basketball, hockey, NASCAR, you name it, we have it. You guys support us. So we appreciate you all, and we'll catch you guys next week.